Hello, everybody! This is Sunrandom Neko, waking up from my nap to greet the world for the day. And by greet, I mean continue my One Piece live-action adaptation marathon with the newly released Season 2, and keep fueling the flames of war because as much of an improvement as Season 2 was, it still fell short of my expectations, and wasn't enough to give weight to the claims that the show is an amazing live-action adaptation of anime, because being better than Cowboy Bebop is still not a high enough bar to set your standards to. Now that Monkey D. Luffy has gathered members for his crew, they finally set sail for the treacherous Grand Line, where they encounter new friends and old foes, while being pursued by Baroque Works, a mysterious organization of assassins with unknown but nefarious plans for the country of Alabasta. The story for this season is actually an improvement compared to the previous season, which is great. However, it also commits many of the same mistakes and makes some new ones as well, which is not so great. Excessive telling and minimal showing continues to persist, but now they've added redundancy where there are quite a few scenes that repeat the same information with only slightly different wording. It also spelled things out more obviously and more often, instead of having reveals that would leave more of an impact, or actions that spoke just as loudly. And there were still quite a few cutaways to the Marines for a B storyline, though at least it's more relevant to the overarching plot now despite it starting with an unnecessary cameo of Garp, Kobe, and Helmeppo. The show's also trying to set things up early on, which is great, but a lot of that setup isn't even for things that were going to be relevant in the season. While sure, most of it will most likely be relevant for the next season, it made the current season feel more like a stepping stone, so it was harder for me to really care about what's going to happen. And some of the cameos and conversations made it feel like the show's intentionally baiting fans with Easter eggs, or deceiving newcomers with unnecessary red herrings. As for the story itself, while they continued to do a decent job of condensing the 5 arcs presented in the season, instead of being consistently mediocre, the quality was like a climb to a mountain peak before tumbling down to rock bottom. The Logtown arc was a decent start but shaky in its execution, and Reverse Mountain was the same if only slightly more steady. Whiskey Peak was the peak of Season 2 though, pun absolutely intended, and I loved everything about it, especially Zoro's fight against 100 assassins having more depth added to it as his defeat to Mihawk visibly haunts him. And I appreciate that they removed the Zoro vs. Luffy fight, but they instead replaced it with Luffy angrily going after Vivi and Igurum, which contradicts his actions with Nami, where he still trusted her and his gut despite her betrayal. But with Vivi and Igurum, he didn't even try to give them a chance to explain. Despite that blemish, the episode was everything I wanted from the live action with its focus on the Straw Hat crew, and a narrative with emotional impact that didn't feel cheap or shoehorned in. Unfortunately, it was all downhill from there. Little Garden felt so long and like nothing of value was really happening, because the narrative took its sweet time getting to each plot point while barely spending any of that time on the things that really mattered, like Usopp and Brogy's friendship. It felt like there was no real weight to anything, like it was only happening because it was in the original story, or was shoehorned in for a cheap grab at emotions. There was also no sense of urgency or tension despite the Straw Hats actually being in danger and dying. And despite what people say, the live action fumbled hard with Drum Island, especially with Chopper's backstory and Wapol's defeat. While I understand that details need to be changed to condense the arc, too many were changed, cut out, or rearranged. Like, why did all the confrontations have to be inside, not outside? Why was the flag locked up instead of waving up high like the symbol it's supposed to be? And all sorts of other details were messed with that greatly affected the impact of Chopper's story and minimized Hero Luke's sacrifice, making the cherry blossom scene feel unearned. There were also so many other things I didn't like about this arc, such as how easily Luffy got Chopper to trust him, the lackluster flag protection scene, Sanji monologuing about his mom while Wapol's about to storm the castle, the battle against Wapol's army feeling like a generic fantasy battle rather than a fight for liberation, and so much more that made the whole arc feel underwhelming and lacked the emotional punch of the original story. Now moving on to the subject of characters, I appreciate that the Straw Hat crew have more life and personality to them, that they're not just different shades of deadpan and sarcastic anymore. They're even undergoing more character growth, though some of it felt tacked on. Like Usopp growing into his bravery felt more like an afterthought given how the last season pretty much downplayed the cowardly part of his character. And I love how we're finally getting more crew bonding that allows them to get a step closer to being the nakama we love to see and root for. But it's still not enough because despite looking more like a crew, they still don't quite feel like a crew, as they spend more time bonding in pairs than as a group. And while I'm finally starting to give more than two hoots about the Straw Hats, I still don't care as much about them as I do with the side characters, new and returning, who all nailed their roles and even surpassed the original in some rare cases. Like Mr. Nine, who I forgot even existed until he showed up in Reverse Mountain, and completely stole the show in Whiskey Peak. In contrast, the new member of the Straw Hat crew, Chopper, felt like a watered-down version of his original counterpart. Like his promise to be a doctor didn't have the same impact because he's just standing before the flag and making a tearful vow, as opposed to him desperately waving the flag around and shouting his wish with great passion and conviction. His entire character felt like a close but no cigar, because as I talked about earlier, his backstory was fumbled alongside the entirety of the Drum Island arc. And I'm really confused by the portrayal of Luffy for this season. It felt like his emotions were on a constantly sliding scale, which was great for the encounter with Miss Golden Week, but confusing everywhere else. It was like they couldn't pin down how they wanted him to act, so they threw everything at the wall to see what stuck, which is irritating because this is something that's supposed to have been figured out before the season even began. He's quickly proving to be the weakest part of the show, and that's not something you want from the character who's supposed to be the heart of it. In regards to production, it's pretty much the same as it was the previous season, but with some noticeable improvements and not so great regressions. The art, makeup, hair, and costume departments continue to do good work bringing the characters and settings to life. Though Wapol's monsters, while menacing, gave off a generic fantasy vibe with how they look like the orcs from Lord of the Rings, just with metal stuck on them. There's also better lighting and more color this time, finally making the overall look of the show not as bland as before, but the colors still lean heavily towards the natural and neutral side of the spectrum, and could still use just a little more saturation. The fights are once again a 50-50 split, with the non-CGI reliant sequences being well choreographed with great practical effects, while the CGI reliant sequences continue to be underwhelming. And the rest of the CGI was a mixed bag, with Chopper in his normal form being extremely well done, and his reindeer form only slightly in the uncanny valley. But his monster form is oddly shaped and disappointing, as he looks more like a teenage Sasquatch than a giant monster, which again makes me question what's the point of adapting an anime like One Piece when it'll always be limited by budget or technology, and thus will never really look right, nor have the freedom of imagination like it does with animation. Overall, Season 2 of the One Piece live-action adaptation gets a C-. It definitely showed visible improvement from Season 1, but still made the same mistakes and even added some new ones as well. The build-up that been lacking can finally be seen, but a lot of it was spent on things that weren't even going to be relevant in the current season. And quite a bit felt like Easter eggs that were just meant to appease fans just in case the show didn't go on for that long, which was time and money that could have been better spent on actually relevant build-up for the current season, not the second or third season after. The story execution continues to persist with excessive telling and minimal showing, with the added downgrade of redundancy, where it sometimes repeats the same information just with slightly different wording. And while the show continues to do a decent job of condensing the packed story of One Piece, only Whiskey Peak was actually great while the rest of the arcs were shaky at best and diminished of all nuanced emotion and charm at worst. Like with the lacking character bonding in Little Garden, and whatever it was they were trying to do with Drum Island. I'm also seeing a pattern form where the last third of the season always seems to fall short in terms of emotional impact with the way they changed and cut out too many details, thus fundamentally altering an important character and their arc, like they first did with Nami and now they've done again with poor Chopper. At the very least, the Straw Hat crew has a little more personality and are bonding more as a crew now. But it's still not enough as the side characters continue to steal the show whenever they appear, making the main characters feel lacking in comparison, especially Luffy, who's now becoming the weakest part of the show. In addition, the production is still pretty much the same, though at least there's a little more color and better lighting. The fight scenes are still well choreographed, but the CGI-reliant scenes and characters are still a mixed bag, like Chopper's forms being hit or miss, and Luffy's fights still being underwhelming. Which once again leaves me wondering why it was One Piece that had to be adapted into live action and not any other less CGI-reliant anime. Because despite the visible improvement, it's only a small net gain as the show takes 2 steps forward before quickly backtracking 1.5 steps back. So unless Season 3 manages to be something truly spectacular, I might just check out of the live action altogether and spend my time getting through my extremely long anime to watch list instead. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Reminder that this is just my opinion, so you can take it with as many grains of salt as you want. I don't mind either way, and would love to know your thoughts in the comment section down below. Please feel free to like, subscribe, and comment which show you'd like me to give my 2 cents about next. Also, as much of a sort of improvement as this season was, it still had way more it could have improved upon. So just like with Season 1, I'm gonna make a rewrite video where I'll present my version of how Season 2 could have gone. So please look forward to it. Until then, this is Sunrandom Neko going off to take a nap now. Don't forget to keep calm and just meow.